Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast. Is it worth it?
I'm really excited for this one
Oh,
today.
me too. Because, well, I want you to imagine something. Imagine stepping off this modern jet, right? You're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean,
Right.
and you instinctively reach into your pocket for your phone, to book an Uber to your hotel.
Like we all do, muscle memory.
Exactly. But suddenly you realize you have just been completely, utterly untethered from the gig economy.
The app just spins and
It just spins. There's no Uber. There's no taxi rank. Actually, there isn't even like a public bus.
Nothing.
Instead, you walk out of this tiny little terminal and there's a rental car just sitting there on the tarmac with the keys literally left dangling in the ignition just waiting for you.
It's wild. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
It really is. Today, our mission is to unpack what might be, honestly, the most brutally honest logistics-first travel dossier we have ever encountered.
Yeah, it's a completely remarkable document. What we're analyzing today is this comprehensive, unsponsored travel brief compiled by two authors, Phil and H.
Right.
And what they've done is they've stripped away every single ounce of, that glossy tourism board spin.
So refreshing.
Exactly, just to examine the raw, functional reality of visiting Norfolk Island.
And that is exactly why we are dedicating an entire deep dive to this today. Because usually when I talk about a modern vacation, there's this underlying expectation of frictionless precision, right?
Oh, for sure. Everything is engineered to be seamless.
Yeah, like you scan a QR code at the resort, your phone acts as your digital room key, and the local tourism authority has essentially paved the jungle to make sure you never have to think about logistics.
But Norfolk Island is the absolute antithesis of that.
Total opposite. It's this isolated speck of land sitting 914 miles east of Brisbane. It's just stranded out in the open ocean between Australia, New Zealand, and New Caledonia.
It's a true geographical anomaly. And because of that isolation, it forces just a completely different type of travel experience.
Right. And our core question today, the entire reason we're digging into this massive stack of research, prices, and frankly, some intense logistical warnings, is this. Is this tiny boutique Pacific dot genuinely worth the US $454 flight to get there?
Or is it, as some critics like to claim, just a retiree bus tour pretending to be an island holiday?
Exactly. So we're going to cover all 11 segments of this travel brief in order today. We're unpacking the geopolitical quirks, the incredibly strict bed caps.
The grocery prices, which are fascinating.
Oh, yes. Exactly what a supermarket chicken costs when it has to survive a 900-mile air freight journey. We'll hit the 3 brutal logistics traps that catch almost every single first-timer. And finally, we will run all of this through a ruthless, is it worth it matrix.
And as we go through this, what you really need to keep in mind is that this isn't just like a list of facts and prices.
No.
It's a case study in what happens when a destination actively resists mass tourism.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with segment 1, the macro context. Because the dossier gives us a headline that immediately reframes how you have to view this island. Norfolk Island is explicitly managed as a boutique destination.
Right.
Now, normally, boutique is just this empty marketing buzzword, like a hotel uses it to justify charging you $50 more for a smaller room.
Exactly, yeah. But here, it's actually structural, isn't it?
Yes, it's a critical distinction. The word boutique here refers to a deliberate physical and legal constraint on human capacity.
Because the entire island is capped at approximately 1,400 tourist beds.
Right.
Distributed across maybe 60-plus properties.
Wait, 1,400 beds for the entire island? I mean, there are single cruise ships that hold 4 times that number of people.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the mechanics of that deliberate constraint.
Yeah.
There's no oversupply because they simply do not allow it to be built. You will not find sprawling, all-inclusive mega resorts tearing up the coastline, pouring concrete over the beaches to build swim-up bars.
Yeah.
They just won't have it.
And perhaps most crucially to the island's economic defense mechanism, there is no deep water harbor.
Right. They've essentially built an economic moat around the island simply by refusing to construct the massive infrastructure that mass tourism demands.
It's brilliant. If you cannot dock a mega ship, and you cannot land wide-body jets every hour, you inherently protect the island from being loved to death by millions of visitors.
Yeah, which brings us to the governance, because this is where the logistics get incredibly interesting for anyone trying to navigate it.
Right, because Norfolk Island is an Australian external territory. So what does this actually mean for you when you step off the plane? Are you in Australia or are you in some sort of sovereign gray zone?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it means that legally and financially, You are dealing with Australian systems, but operating under extreme geographical duress.
Okay, so the Australian dollar is the legal tender.
Yes. And if you are an Australian citizen, your Medicare works perfectly at the local clinic. Mainland taxation applies. The pivotal moment in their modern history was July 1st, 2016.
What happened then?
That was the exact date when biosecurity, customs, immigration, and social security were fully extended from the Australian mainland to the island.
But, I mean, integrating an island 900 miles away into a massive mainland bureaucracy isn't exactly a smooth process, right?
No, not at all.
Because the dossier notes that the governance is actually in a massive state of transition right now.
It has been a highly complex and honestly often friction-filled transition. On November 13th, 2024, the Australian government in Canberra announced a completely new governance model.
Right.
This was based on the comprehensive recommendations of the Norfolk Island Governance Committee. What happened was, back in 2021, the local regional council went into administration.
So the local government basically fell apart.
Essentially, yeah. The local self-governing apparatus just struggled with the financial and logistical realities of maintaining modern infrastructure on such a remote rock, so an administrator was appointed.
So Canberra effectively stepped in to run the show.
Yes. The November 2024 shakeup formally replaced that temporary administrator arrangement. Canberra has taken a much firmer, more direct hand in the island's affairs.
And from a tourist's perspective, in 2026, this matters, right? Because it dictates how local services are funded, how the roads are maintained, and how they balance local heritage with federal Australian standards.
Precisely. But despite all of this federal integration, there is a massive silver lining when it comes to the tax relationship with the mainland.
Oh, yeah. The dossier points out a very specific tax quirk that every visitor needs to know about.
It is a quirk that drastically impacts your spending power. GST, the Australian Goods and Services Tax, as well as several other indirect mainland taxes, do not apply to local transactions on Norfolk Island.
Let's be really clear about what that means. If I walk into a store on the mainland in Sydney, 10% of the purchase price is GST.
Right.
Here, that vanishes. Which means duty-free is actually genuinely duty-free.
Yes. If you're buying local services, or if you're looking at imported duty-free goods like alcohol and high-end fragrances, the pricing represents a genuine, substantial saving compared to the mainland. You aren't paying that federal tax markup.
That's huge. Now, before we move on to the actual flights and the costs of getting there, we have to talk about the heritage. Because you don't just go to Norfolk Island for a beach.
No, definitely not.
The island holds a UNESCO World Heritage listing that covers the Kingston and Arthur's Vale historic area.
The historical density of that specific area is staggering. It is a Georgian convict-era settlement. It's recognized as one of only 11 inscribed Australian convict sites.
Wow.
What you have to understand is that Norfolk Island wasn't just like a regular colony. It was designed as the harshest penal settlement in the entire British Empire.
It was the prison for the prisoners, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And today, those incredible Georgian stone buildings still stand, making it a living, breathing museum of colonial history.
Okay, let's talk about the reality of getting there, because this is where a monopoly completely dictates your wallet.
Qantas.
Yep, Qantas is the sole commercial carrier servicing the island. They fly direct from Sydney and Brisbane. Based on the 2026 data in the dossier, the absolute cheapest round trips you are going to find out of Brisbane are US $454.
With one-way tickets starting from US $279.
Right. But before we break down the rest of the flight costs, I have to bring up this, they call it the bonus 2026 curveball from the brief, because it's just wild.
Oh, the tariff.
Yes. In April 2025, the Trump administration in the United States briefly slapped a 29% tariff on Norfolk Island.
It is a fascinating, almost bizarre geopolitical footnote.
Yeah.
And, to look at it purely, impartially, strictly as a logistical phenomenon without any political bias.
Right. Completely objectively.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the island's unique vulnerability.
Wait, how does a U.S. tariff policy accidentally target a tiny rock with 1,400 tourist beds in the middle of the Pacific?
It happens because of how automated global trade and bureaucratic systems function. A broad-brush tariff policy is enacted in Washington, D.C., designed to target specific international trade imbalances, right?
Okay, yeah.
But massive bureaucratic systems don't always capture the nuanced constitutional statuses of external territories immediately. To the algorithms and the paperwork, Norfolk Island might briefly appear as a distinct entity or get swept up in a broader regional categorization that triggers the tariff.
That's crazy.
The confusion was eventually resolved, of course, but it highlights a profound logistical reality. Norfolk Island is essentially invisible on the global stage.
So when you travel there, you are going to a place that global supply chains and massive bureaucracies frequently forget even exists.
Exactly.
That is incredible. A system error that proves just how off the grid you really are. All right, let's move into segment 2. Timing is everything. Because if you are going to drop US $454 on a flight, you cannot afford to mess up the calendar.
No, the dossier is incredibly strict about this. It lays out a very specific sweet spot for travel.
The ideal travel window is undeniably October through May. If you book within those months, you're looking at average temperatures sitting beautifully between 66 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit.
Perfect weather.
Yeah, you experience much lower humidity compared to the tropical islands further north, and crucially, you have calm seas.
Now, why do calm seas matter so much to a tourist? Like, if I'm just sitting on the beach, do I really care what the ocean swell is doing 3 miles out?
You absolutely do, because it impacts everything you eat and do. Remember that lack of a deepwater harbor we discussed?
Oh, right, the cargo.
Exactly. Almost everything arriving by sea, from heavy cargo to cruise ship passengers, has to be transferred from ships anchored out in the deep ocean onto lighter, smaller tender boats.
And those boats then navigate the swell to reach the exposed jetties.
Right. If the ocean is rough, those tender boats cannot safely operate. Cargo gets delayed, cruise passengers don't get to disembark. Calm seas are the logistical lifeblood of the island.
Okay, so October to May is the golden window. Let's break down these exact flight fares from the brief so you know exactly what to budget.
We mentioned Brisbane. Mid-January, you can snag that round trip for US $454, with mid-December one-ways from US $279.
And if you're leaving from Sydney, it is surprisingly a bit cheaper.
Oh, really?
Yeah, round trips from Sydney start at US $333 and one-ways from US $300.
What if you are listening from the United States? The logistics get a bit more complex, right?
Definitely. The average U.S. round trip connecting via Sydney sits at around US $1,694. However, the dossier notes that the cheapest U.S. originating fare booked recently was US $629.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, the algorithmic pricing fluctuates wildly. There are significant deals if you set your alerts and hunt for them.
What if you are flying out of New Zealand? I mean, they're relatively close geographically.
Geographically, yes, but logistically, absolutely not. In 2026, Auckland has 0 direct commercial service to Norfolk Island.
Wait, 0?
None. You are forced to fly west to Australia, either Sydney or Brisbane, and then fly east back out over the ocean to the island. That trans-Tasman connection typically adds about US $350 to your overall round-trip fare.
That is brutal for Kiwis. Okay, so we know the sweet spot. But what happens if you ignore the dossier's advice and decide to travel during the winter, say June through September? What is the actual risk?
The winter risk is substantial. It goes far beyond just, needing a sweater.
Okay.
Yes, the temperatures drop to between 54 and 66 degrees Fahrenheit, which isn't exactly beach weather. But the real threat is the wind.
The wind.
It becomes significantly windier in the winter, and here is where the infrastructure trap snaps shut. Qantas only runs a 4 flights per week schedule out of Sydney. The airport at Burt Pine has a single, highly exposed runway.
Oh, no.
Those flights are intensely vulnerable to crosswinds. If the wind exceeds the aircraft's safety limits, they cannot land.
Wait, so you fly 2.5 hours out over the open ocean, the pilot decides the crosswind is too dangerous, and then what? They just circle until the wind stops.
No, they don't have the fuel reserves to circle indefinitely over the Pacific. They are forced to abort the landing, turn around, and fly all the way back to the Australian mainland. Or occasionally they divert to Noumea in New Caledonia.
You literally lose a whole day of your vacation just sitting in a pressurized metal tube, arriving right back where you started.
It is a nightmare.
We will definitely dig deeper into that specific logistical trap later, because the cascading effects of a canceled flight are massive. But let's talk about the crowds, or rather, the deliberate lack of them.
The uncrowd appeal.
Exactly. As the dossier says, Norfolk deliberately stays small. No traffic lights anywhere on the island, no high-rises blocking the sun, no sprawling resort strip.
And my personal favorite detail.
Yes?
You never, ever need to wake up at 7 a.m. to run down to the pool and stake out a plastic lounge chair with your towel.
That is the ultimate luxury of the 1,400 bed cap. The island can never physically be overrun. Even at 100% maximum occupancy, the beaches, the cafes, and the historic ruins remain totally calm. You are basically buying solitude.
But there is a massive trap here regarding timing that you have to watch out for. The dossier explicitly warns about the public holiday week trap.
Oh, because the bed count is so strictly limited, the island operates on a very fragile supply and demand curve, right?
Exactly. If you try to book during a major Australian public holiday week like Easter or the Christmas period, you will see nightly rates jump by 25 to 30% across the board.
Oh.
Furthermore, because there are so few beds, the entire island completely sells out up to 4 months in advance.
So if we synthesize all of this, the weather, the flight costs, the crosswind risks, and the holiday price gouging, what is the ultimate verdict on timing? When should you actually go?
The absolute best months to go, balancing optimal weather, reasonable cost, and accommodation availability, are the shoulder seasons, March to May and September to November.
Perfect. That brings us to segment 3, first impressions. And this is where the promised 1950s time warp really hits you square in the face.
Yeah, let's paint the picture.
You are on Qantas flight QF1065 out of Sydney. It is a 2-hour and 40-minute flight. You descend over these massive, sheer cliffs dropping into the deep blue ocean, and you land at the airport, which is quite literally a single runway strip sitting right beside the main commercial center of Burnt Pine.
The scale of it is immediately disarming. I mean, from the moment you clear the tiny arrivals hall, you are a maximum 5-minute drive from almost any accommodation on the island.
But this is exactly where the modern traveler experiences their first major logistics shock.
Yes, because muscle memory takes over. You step out of the terminal, you pull out your smartphone, you open your rideshare app, and
Nothing at all. There is no Uber, there is no taxi rank with a line of yellow cabs, there is no regular public bus system running a loop. You are completely on your own.
You are entirely untethered from the modern gig economy. The infrastructure simply does not exist to support it.
So what do you do?
Well, instead, you experience this wonderful, anachronistic alternative. Every accommodation provider will either meet you personally at the terminal as part of your tariff, or your rental car will simply be waiting for you out on the apron.
And they don't hand you the keys at a desk.
No, the keys are genuinely left right in the ignition.
I just love that. It requires a level of communal trust that most of us haven't experienced in decades.
It really does.
But then, okay, you get into your unlocked rental car, you pull out onto the road, and you hit the second major shock. Well, you don't hit it. Hopefully you slam on the brakes for it.
The cows.
Cows! Cows are just wandering down the middle of the road.
And this isn't just a quaint rural hazard. It is a critical legal quirk of the island. Norfolk Island operates under a strict stock-at-large law.
Right, which explicitly gives livestock the legal right-of-way on all public roads.
Wait, explain the legal mechanism of a cow having the right-of-way over a motor vehicle, because that sounds insane.
Well, it stems from the island's agricultural heritage and the concept of the commons. The roadsides provide grazing land, so the law dictates that a 1,500-pound heifer has priority.
Ah.
Consequently, the absolute maximum speed limit across the entire island is 30 miles per hour, and in many places, it's significantly less. You literally have to brake and wait for a herd of cows to decide to cross the street.
It forces a complete deceleration of your day, both physically and mentally. You simply cannot be in a rush on Norfolk Island.
And speaking of mental deceleration, the third shock that hits you on day one is the digital disconnect.
Oh, right. If you are addicted to your smartphone, the geography is going to enforce a harsh detox.
Because there is essentially zero mobile cellular signal in most of the southwest of the island.
The main carrier, Telstra, functions relatively well when you're standing in the middle of Burnt Pine or driving along Taylor's Road, but the moment you drop down into the valleys or head toward the coast, it is incredibly patchy.
You simply cannot rely on being connected to the outside world.
And then you drive down into the Kingston and Arthur's Vale UNESCO precinct. I really want to emphasize how bizarre this feels to a modern tourist.
Yes, paint the picture.
This is the area with the beautifully preserved Georgian stone cottages, the incredibly evocative convict pier jutting out into the ocean, the gorgeous towering pine-lined quality row.
That sounds beautiful.
It is. But if this site existed in Europe or North America, it would be surrounded by a massive steel fence. You'd have to funnel through a multi-million-dollar visitor center, buy a $30 ticket, and scan a barcode just to get near it.
It would be intensely monetized and aggressively policed.
But here, it is just entirely open. There is no gate. There is no ticket booth. You are free to walk right through it at dawn, at noon, or at midnight.
And yes, it is completely open to those roaming cows we just mentioned. You will see livestock grazing right next to 200-year-old colonial administration buildings.
It's so surreal. The dossier summarizes the vibe perfectly. It says the island feels like a 1950s Norfolk pine bounty descendant village bolted onto a Jurassic Park coastline.
That juxtaposition is the defining aesthetic of the island. You have this mid-century rural pastoral life taking place on top of sheer, dramatic, primeval Pacific geography.
But before we get too lost in the romance of it all, we need a quick reality check on prices while we're setting the scene.
Oh, yes. Good point.
If you stop to process all this and grab a coffee and a scone at Hilly Restaurant or Olive's Cafe in town, it is going to run you between US $8 and $10.
Which is an important calibrator for your budget. It's remote, and it is a time warp, but it isn't immune to standard regional pricing.
Right. That US $8 to $10 price point puts it exactly on par with a nice cafe in regional New South Wales on the mainland.
Okay, let's move into segment 4, the lodging landscape. We have 4 honest tiers of accommodation outlined in the dossier here, complete with named properties and actual 2026 US dollar prices.
And the critical connection to make here, tying directly back to our arrival discussion about the lack of Ubers and taxis, is that you cannot easily navigate this island without a vehicle. Recognizing this, almost all of these properties bundle the cost of a rental car directly into their nightly rate. When you are assessing these prices, you must factor in that the vehicle is usually part of the value proposition.
So let's start at the bottom. Tier 1 is the budget tier. You are looking at US $90 to $130 a night.
Okay.
These are self-catering, one-bedroom apartments equipped with basic kitchenettes, and yes, the car is included. The brief name drops specific places like Panorama Seaside Apartments, Seaview Norfolk Island, and Channer's Corner.
This tier is really about functional utility. The decor might be a bit dated, but it provides exactly what you need. A clean bed, a vehicle to explore, and crucially, the independence to cook your own meals.
Which is a vital strategy for budget management on an island where dining out is expensive.
Right. Then we step up to Tier 2, mid-range. This runs US $140 to $210 a night. Now you're moving out of basic apartments and getting into standalone cottages. You start seeing amenities like swimming pools and on-site dining options. Properties in this bracket include the South Pacific Resort Hotel down in the southwest, Governor's Lodge Resort Hotel, which sits right beside the Kingston historic area, and Paradise Hotel and Resort up in Burnt Pine.
This tier is really the sweet spot for the majority of standard vacationers. You are securing comfortable resort-style amenities and manicured grounds, but you aren't paying the extreme premiums demanded by luxury villas. It balances comfort with cost effectively.
If you want to push into luxury, Tier 3 is upper mid-range, running US $220 to $290 a night. These are high-end villas that focus heavily on location and views.
Give me some examples.
We're talking about places like Tin Sheds, Norfolk Island, Forester Court, Clifftop cottages, which literally look right out over the crashing Pacific, or Whispering Pines cottages, which are nestled deep within those iconic Araucaria tree forests.
The premium you are paying here is for aesthetic isolation. You are paying for architectural quality, extreme privacy, and unobstructed views of the ocean or the valleys.
And finally, the pinnacle, Tier 4, luxury. This ranges from US $325 to $490 a night. This includes properties like Shearwater Scenic Villas or the Seventh Day Cottages, which feature these massive, full panoramic ocean decks.
But the dossier highlights a standout value play in this luxury space that bypasses the nightly rate entirely. The Qantas Holidays Norfolk Explorer Bundle.
This is a fascinating package for 2026. For roughly US $2,080 per person, twin share, the math is incredibly compelling.
What does that include?
That price includes your round-trip Qantas flights, 7 nights of high-end luxury accommodation, your rental car for the entire 7 days, and 8 curated island experiences.
Wow. When you manually price out those components individually, this bundle represents arguably the best luxury value available on the island. It removes all the friction of piecemeal booking.
Okay, we know where we're sleeping. Let's move to segment 5, survival and socializing. Because you have to eat, and keeping humans fed on an isolated rock 900 miles from the nearest major continent is a terrifying logistical feat.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to deeply understand the vulnerability of their supply chain. The entire island relies essentially on 2 main supermarkets.
Foodland Norfolk, located in Burnt Pine, is the primary player, with Romano's IGA acting as the secondary grocer.
And their shelves are not magically restocked every night by a fleet of semi-trucks. They are entirely at the mercy of the elements.
Exactly. The foundational stock canned goods, dry supplies, heavy items arrives via a monthly cargo ship. That is supplemented by highly expensive fresh air freight brought in on the passenger Qantas flights.
That dual system must totally dictate the rhythm of local life.
Oh, it does. You cannot simply decide to bake a complex cake on a Tuesday if they are out of flour. You have to plan your shopping around the delivery days, which are typically Wednesday and Saturday when the planes are unloaded.
When the fresh produce hits the shelves, there's a literal rush to secure it.
Let's look at the real 2026 prices at the supermarket, because the air freight premium is very real, and it will shock you if you aren't prepared. A standard loaf of bread is US $4.25. 1 liter of milk, about a quarter of a gallon, is US $2.75. A dozen eggs will set you back US $6.20. And a pound of bananas is US $2.10.
The sticker shock is undeniable, but you have to contextualize it. When you factor in the aviation fuel, the strict weight limits of a Boeing 737, and the complex cold chain logistics required to keep dairy and produce fresh across 1,000 miles of ocean.
It's actually quite remarkable the supermarkets manage to keep prices to those margins without going bankrupt.
What about alcohol? Because you are definitely going to want to drink after paying $6 for eggs.
Yeah, a six-pack of locally brewed Two Chimneys beer is US $21. A bottle of Midrange Australian red wine is US $14.
But this is where that tax quirk we discussed earlier swoops in to save you.
Right.
Because there is no GST applied to Norfolk Island transactions, the duty-free advantage is massive. High-proof spirits are genuinely 30 to 40% cheaper than they are in mainland Australia.
So while your beer is expensive, your gin and tonic is a bargain.
Exactly. Okay, let's step out of the supermarket aisles and look at dining out. If you don't want to cook in your kitchenette, what are you paying?
If you go to Hilly for a casual plate of fish and chips, it's US $18. If you want a proper sit-down main course at Dino's at Bombora's, you're looking at US $25 to $31.
But the brief highlights two very specific cultural dining experiences that you absolutely must budget for because they define the trip.
The first is the local fish fry. This isn't a restaurant. It is the island's signature locals-run beach feast. It costs about AU $95, which translates to roughly US $62 per person.
It's an essential cultural touchstone where the community cooks for the visitors.
And the second is the progressive dinner, which also runs US $62 per person. Now, I love the mechanics of this. You don't just sit at a table in a restaurant.
No, you are physically transported to 3 different local homes for 3 different courses.
It is a brilliant concept. You walk into a stranger's 1950s-era home, sit in their living room, eat their family recipes made from local produce, and listen to their stories.
It completely bypasses the artificial, sterile resort dining experience and places you directly into the living, breathing community.
And speaking of the community, we have to talk about etiquette and language, because the demographics here are wildly unique.
Right. About a third of the locals are direct descendants of the HMS Bounty mutineers and the original Pitcairn Islanders.
The history there is staggering. In 1856, the descendants of the famous mutiny on the Bounty outgrew tiny Pitcairn Island, and Queen Victoria granted them the right to resettle on the recently abandoned penal colony of Norfolk Island.
Because of that unique, isolated lineage, they speak a language called Norfolk. It is actually a protected UNESCO language, a fascinating, evolving blend of 18th century nautical English and Tahitian.
So when a local says, "What away," they are saying, "How are you?" And the dossier outlines some very strict rules of respect you need to follow.
Like what?
Well, a simple nod is the expected greeting when you pass someone on the street. You're expected to wave at every single oncoming car, which is easy to do because remember, everyone is driving 30 miles per hour to avoid the cows anyway.
True.
There are also non-negotiable rules regarding the heritage sites. You absolutely do not climb on the Kingston convict ruins. They are fragile and sacred to the history of the island.
And importantly, especially for listeners from North America who are conditioned to add 20% to every bill, tipping is not expected here.
Good to know.
It is an Australian territory. The service wage is built directly into the menu price. If the fish is $18, you pay $18.
Nice. Okay, segment 6 is where we bring all these numbers together. The daily ledger. We need the out-of-pocket budget breakdown. What is the actual daily burn rate once you're on the ground?
Let's run the math, starting with the low budget tier. For US $125 a day, you can survive.
How?
You manage this by splitting a Tier 1 self-catering apartment 2 ways. You cook all your own meals using supermarket groceries. You share the included rental car, which is crucial because a standalone car hire would cost you US $30 to $40 a day out of pocket. And you strictly budget for just one paid tour every 3 days.
That requires high discipline, but it is entirely doable.
What about the mid-tier? The mid-range budget runs about US $230 a day per person. This is far more comfortable. It gets you a Tier 2 cottage with the car included, allows for one sit-down restaurant dinner daily, and covers 2 premium-paid experiences over your trip.
So like a guided convict history tour for US $36 and that famous fish fry for US $62.
Exactly. And if you want to blow it out and go high-end,
You're looking at US $425 or more per day per person. That places you in a Tier 4 clifftop villa, eating a la carte restaurant, dining every single night, and booking premium activities like a half-day charter fishing trip out on the deep ocean, which runs about US $180.
what about families? The dossier prices out a hypothetical family of 4 for a 7-night stay.
All in, including those Qantas round-trip fares we quoted at US $454 each, a family of 4 will spend approximately US $5,075.
When you analyze that figure against the broader Pacific tourism market, it is highly competitive.
Yeah, it's meaningfully cheaper than taking a family to major resorts in Fiji or New Caledonia, and it is broadly on par with a week on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, once you factor in the daily costs of mainland theme parks and dining.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. The brief explicitly warns off digital nomads.
Oh yeah, hard pass.
If you're a remote worker and you think, hey, I'll just post up on a Pacific island for a month, the dossier says it will cost you between US $3,800 and US $4,500 for a mid-range cottage, car, and groceries. But it tells you absolutely not to do it. Why?
Because it is terrible value for a digital nomad. The math doesn't align with the productivity. The primary reason is the digital infrastructure, specifically the incredibly limited satellite broadband, which we will dig into the mechanics of shortly.
You are paying premium first world luxury rates, but you simply cannot work efficiently. You will be tearing your hair out trying to upload a simple PDF.
Which perfectly sets us up for segment 7, the 3 logistics traps. This is the most crucial part of the dossier. Every first-timer gets caught by at least one of these.
Trap number 1, the Qantas diversion. We touched on this earlier regarding winter weather, but let's look at the actual mechanism of how this ruins your trip.
The mechanical failure point is the single runway at Burnt Pine. It is highly crosswind sensitive. If the wind gusts exceed the Boeing 737 safety limits, the aircraft simply cannot land.
So Qantas flights will divert to Noumea or turn around and fly 2.5 hours all the way back to Brisbane or Sydney.
Right, so the immediate reality is you lose a full day of your vacation right off the bat. But it gets worse than that, doesn't it?
Far worse, because you might be waiting 48 to 72 hours for a rebooking. Remember the bottleneck? There are only 4 flights a week from Sydney and 3 from Brisbane.
Oh, man.
If 150 people miss their landing on a Tuesday, they can't just put them on a plane on Wednesday because Wednesday's plane doesn't exist and Thursday's plane is already fully booked. You are stuck in a cascading queue for days.
Wait, if I'm looking at these winter weather stats, I'm confused. If Qantas only flies 4 times a week, and crosswinds force a diversion, you're not just delayed a few hours, you're stranded. How does anyone confidently book a trip under those conditions? What is the fix?
The fix is strictly administrative. First, you must buy comprehensive travel insurance that explicitly includes weather diversion cover. Read the fine print, because many basic policies do not cover it.
Good tip.
And second, from a scheduling standpoint, never book the last possible flight of your annual leave window. If you have to be back at your desk in Sydney on Monday morning, do not book the Sunday flight home. You need to leave a buffer day on either side of your trip.
Trap number 2, the cow-at-large rental. I am slightly obsessed with this one because the insurance mechanics are so uniquely treacherous.
It is a unique legal and insurance nightmare. The mechanism, as we discussed, is that island law gives livestock the right of way. Now, because of this extreme local hazard, your standard Australian mainland comprehensive car insurance policy almost certainly contains a geographic exclusion clause for Norfolk Island.
Oh, wow. So your expensive mainland policy is completely void the moment you put the keys in the ignition.
Exactly. Your mainland insurer will not cover you hitting a cow in the Pacific. So most visitors use local providers like Aloha Rent-A-Car or Norfolk Island car rentals.
But here's the reality trap. If you decline the extra cover and you hit a cow at night, you are going to pay a massive excess penalty, anywhere from US $975 to US $1,625 straight out of pocket.
Plus, you have to have a very awkward and potentially expensive conversation with the local farmer to compensate them for the loss of the cow.
That is the most expensive steak you will ever buy. So how do you avoid this financial ruin?
The fix is threefold. First, drive strictly under 30 miles per hour, especially after dusk when visibility drops and the dark-colored cows blend into the shadows.
Second, always buy the U.S. $10 a day local collision damage waiver, the CDW top-up from your rental agency. It caps your liability.
And third, a piece of highly specific local advice. Never, ever drive yourself home after drinking wine at a progressive dinner. Let your hosts arrange local transport.
Brilliant advice. Trap number 3, the tenderboat cruise ship. We mentioned the lack of a deepwater harbor. How does this trap cruise passengers?
The mechanism here is the bathymetry of the island. There's very little continental shelf. Ocean swells generated from storms thousands of miles away hit the island's coastline with immense power.
And the stone jetties at Kingston and Cascade are entirely exposed to the open ocean. A massive cruise ship cannot dock.
Right. It must anchor offshore, and passengers must transfer into small tender boats, which then have to time the rising and falling swell to safely unload people onto the wet stone jetties.
And the reality of trying to transfer a 70-year-old tourist from a giant ship onto a violently bobbing small boat in a Pacific swell.
It is incredibly dangerous. Because of that, a staggering 40% of all scheduled cruise calls to Norfolk Island are canceled entirely.
40%.
The captain simply looks at the swell and says, "No, it's not safe," and the ship sails right past. And here is the financial sting. If you have pre-booked an expensive shore experience package with the cruise line, you generally get zero refund when they cancel the stop due to weather.
That is brutal. You spend thousands on a cruise to see Norfolk Island, and you just wave at it through a portal as you sail by.
So the fix is simple. Do not rely on a cruise ship to see Norfolk Island. Fly in and stay a minimum of 4 nights.
Precisely. If you want to see the island, you must commit to the island logistically.
Okay, segment 8. Safety, solitude, and the Sunday shutdown. Let's start with safety, because reading the dossier, this place sounds almost dangerously utopian.
It is genuinely one of the safest destinations within the entire Australian network. Violent crime directed at tourists is virtually non-existent.
It's famous for being a society where locals routinely leave their house doors unlocked and their car keys in the ignition, as we experienced at the airport.
They do have a very small Australian federal police station at Burnt Pine, but it is a remarkably low-friction environment.
And for solo female travelers, the dossier specifically highlights it as highly comfortable. Because of the intimate scale of the community, things like the progressive dinner where you are eating in someone's home, and the very small accommodation providers where the owner greets you by name, you never really feel isolated or alone in a vulnerable way.
However, we must transition from physical safety, from crime, to medical safety, which is a completely different, much harsher reality.
Yeah.
While your Medicare card does cover standard visits to the local clinic, the Norfolk Island Health and Residential Aged Care Service in Burnt Pine, there is a critical limitation.
Right, I'm looking at the facilities here. There is no actual hospital for complex cases.
None. They can set a broken bone or treat a minor infection.
Yeah.
But if you suffer a serious life-threatening medical event, a massive heart attack, or severe physical trauma from a car crash, the island cannot handle it.
So what happens?
You require an emergency medical evacuation by the Royal Flying Doctor Service. This is an incredible logistical feat involving flying a specialized medical jet over 900 miles of ocean to transport you all the way back to a hospital in Brisbane.
And that flight isn't free if you aren't covered, is it?
No, it is astronomically expensive. This is precisely why, even if you are an Australian citizen with full Medicare, comprehensive travel insurance with medical evacuation cover is absolutely vital. You cannot risk being uninsured here.
Let's talk about everyday comforts and discomforts. The tap water is perfectly safe to drink. There are no venomous snakes on the island. There are no marine stingers in the water, and no aggressive shark species that routinely come close to the swimming shores.
But there are a couple of low-level, annoying tourist scams to watch out for. One is the local-only car rental operator who suddenly tacks on unexplained, exorbitant cleaning fees when you return the vehicle, claiming you got too much red dirt on the floor mats. The other is operators offering guided heritage walks through the Kingston ruins for US $40, when in reality they're essentially just reading aloud the exact same information that is already printed on the free national park signage scattered around the site.
Sneaky! But the biggest discomfort for a lot of modern travelers, the thing that will cause genuine psychological friction, is going to be the absolute digital disconnect.
Yes. Let's look at the mechanics of the internet here. The island relies on ADSL-grade NBN satellite internet.
Imagine trying to push a bowling ball through a garden hose.
Exactly. That is what it's like trying to run a 2026 high-definition Zoom meeting through satellite infrastructure designed for basic email and text browsing.
Speeds are capped at an average of 25 megabits per second, and latency, the delay it takes for the signal to reach space and come back, is terrible.
If you are trying to stream 4K video or work collaboratively on cloud documents, you're going to be intensely frustrated.
And it isn't just the internet that shuts down. The island itself basically unplugs once a week, doesn't it?
It does. The entire island essentially enters a mandatory shutdown on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
The supermarkets close, the cafes lock their doors, the tour operators go home to their families.
The dossier's advice for a Sunday afternoon is incredibly blunt. Bring a book.
Bring a book. I love it. It forces you to actually relax.
So segment 9, the highs, lows, and honest disappointments. Let's start with the absolute best moments this island has to offer. When it works, why is it magical?
The primary high, the image that stays with everyone, is undoubtedly the Kingston convict precinct at sunset.
It's completely free, it's UNESCO-listed, and at dusk, after the few tour buses have left, it is often completely empty.
You have the towering cenotaph, the historic stone pier jutting into the surf, the old military barracks, and the grand Georgian cottages of Quality Row, all glowing in the fading light right on the edge of the Pacific. It is incredibly evocative and haunting.
The second high is that Friday evening fish fry at Puppy's Point. For that US $62, you are getting this amazing, authentic, locals-run feast.
You are eating incredibly fresh, island-caught trumpeter fish. You are listening to locals telling stories and singing in the Norfolk language. And you are sitting on the grass, watching the sunset spectacularly over the towering cliffs of Phillip Island in the distance.
And the third major high is the Mount Pitt lookout. It sits at 1,046 feet above sea level. It is highly accessible. Just a short 15-minute walk from the parking area, it costs nothing, and it offers stunning, unimpeded, 360-degree panoramic views across the entirety of the island and out to the curvature of the ocean.
But true to form, Phil and H give us the brutal lows, too. They temper expectations fast so you don't arrive with the wrong mindset.
First, honest disappointment. The beaches.
Yes. If you're comparing this to the massive, sprawling, miles-long white sand beaches of the Gold Coast or Hawaii, you will be disappointed.
The beaches here are tiny coves, and they are highly surge-prone due to the lack of reef protection. Emily Bay is practically the only safe, consistently calm swimming beach on the entire island.
The winter weather is a complete lottery, as we discussed extensively. Qantas reliability just plummets in those cooler months.
And what about the nightlife, if I want to go out after the fish fry?
Nightlife is essentially non-existent. There are 2 main pubs on the island, and they close early. This perfectly suits their core demographic of travelers aged 55 and older who want a quiet evening.
But if you are in your 20s looking for a beach club or a party scene, you will be bitterly disappointed. You will be sitting in your cottage at 9 p.m. in complete silence.
And lastly, the duty-free. We praise the alcohol savings, but the dossier notes the shopping is incredibly boring for tech or fashion. Don't expect to buy a cheap luxury handbag, designer sunglasses, or the latest laptop here. The supply chains don't support high-end retail.
Which brings us naturally to segment 10, the alternatives. If Norfolk Island-specific quirks, the cows, the crosswinds, the lack of nightlife don't appeal to you, what else in the region should you consider?
The dossier offers 2 main alternatives to contrast the experience. Alternative 1 is Lord Howe Island, located off the coast of New South Wales. It is roughly a 2-hour flight from Sydney.
It is even more exclusive than Norfolk. While Norfolk is capped at 1,400 beds, Lord Howe is capped at a strict maximum of 400 visitors at any one time.
And it offers a genuinely superior marine environment. Because it has a proper enclosed coral reef lagoon, the snorkeling in places like Ned's Beach is world-class and perfectly safe from the ocean swell.
But here is the massive catch. Because of that 400-person cap, it is 40 to 60% more expensive than Norfolk Island. Flights start from a staggering US $715, and the absolute cheapest, most basic nightly rates start at US $245 and go up rapidly from there.
Exactly. The dossier's verdict on Lord Howe is precise. Pick it if you demand a pristine reef environment for diving or snorkeling, and you have deep enough pockets to afford the extreme exclusivity premium.
Alternative 2 is New Caledonia. Geographically, it is close. It is just a 90-minute flight from Brisbane. You can get there on the airline Air Cullen for around US $370. You get amazing French Melanesian fusion food and access to the world's third largest coral lagoon.
But the catches there are intensely logistical. You have to deal with patchy English outside the main tourist zones, the friction of constantly converting to the Pacific franc currency.
And from a purely logistical standpoint for a 2026 tourist, the lingering infrastructural tensions and service disruptions stemming from the political unrest that occurred back in 2024.
Right, and we have to view that unrest strictly as a logistical factor for a traveler. We aren't taking sides on the politics. We were just noting that it adds a layer of complexity and potential unpredictability to your travel plans that Norfolk Island simply doesn't have.
So the verdict there. Pick New Caledonia if you want Melanesian culture mixed with incredible French boulangeries and you don't mind navigating a foreign currency and some infrastructural friction.
Which leads us to the grand finale. Segment 11, the ultimate is it worth it matrix. The dossier runs 5 different traveler profiles through all the data we just discussed to give a final verdict.
Let's start with Profile 1, the backpacker. If I'm traveling on a shoestring looking to meet people, is this for me?
The verdict is a hard, unequivocal NO. The infrastructure explicitly rejects backpackers. There are no hostels, there are no shared dorm beds, there are no budget airlines like Jetstar or Ryanair servicing the island to offer $50 flights.
You will not find a single bed under US $90 a night. Furthermore, the entire island's social infrastructure is built around an older 55-plus demographic. If you are a backpacker, the brief bluntly says go to Cairns or Byron Bay instead.
But wait, there is one tiny exception they mentioned, right?
Yes, the only mathematical exception is if you have 30,000 Qantas frequent flyer points to burn on a reward flight. That briefly flips the math, removes the US $454 flight cost, and makes a short stay viable, but socially, you will still be out of place. Otherwise, stay away.
Profile 2, the mid-range traveler. The person with a decent budget who wants comfort, but not extravagance.
Yes, absolutely. At US $230 a day, you hit the absolute sweet spot of value on this island. That budget gets you the comfortable cottage, the included car, the progressive dinner, the fish fry, the convict tour, and the Mount Pitt hike.
With those Qantas round trips sitting at US $454, $26 is mathematically the best mid-range travel window we have seen for this destination in 5 years.
Profile 3, the family. Taking the kids.
Yes, but with severe conditions, the positives. Emily Bay is wonderfully safe for young kids to swim in without fear of rips or huge waves, and the historic precinct is entirely open and engaging to run around in.
And at US $5,075 for a week for a family of 4, it is substantially cheaper than taking the family to a premium resort on Hamilton Island.
But those conditions are important, because if I bring my 15-year-old here, what happens?
Disaster happens. Older teenagers will be climbing the walls with boredom by night 3. The internet is too slow to stream TikTok, there are no shopping malls, and there is zero nightlife.
This destination works best for families with kids under 12 who just want to play in the sand, or multi-generational trips with grandparents and young grandkids who want quiet family time.
Profile 4, luxury. The traveler who wants the best of the best.
Yes, properties like Shearwater Scenic Villas, especially when combined with that Qantas Explorer bundle at US $2,080 per person, deliver genuine high-end boutique Pacific luxury for roughly half the price you would pay at a comparable ultra-luxury resort on Hayman Island or Bora Bora.
And the key insight the dossier makes here is that the lack of crowds is the actual luxury product you are buying. You are paying to be alone in a beautiful place.
And finally, Profile 5, the digital nomad, the remote worker with a laptop.
A definitive NO. As we discussed in depth, you are dealing with sub-25 megabit internet speeds that drop out when it rains. There are no co-working spaces. There is no special nomad visa required since it's an Australian territory, but there is almost zero under 40 social infrastructure.
You'd be paying first-world luxury-level rent for mediocre digital infrastructure. The brief says skip it entirely and go to Hobart in Tasmania or Byron Bay instead.
It is a place to disconnect entirely, not a place to dial in and work.
And that brings us to the end of the dossier. We have unpacked the prices, the traps, the cows, and the crosswinds.
And I want to wrap this up by quoting the exact, blunt sign-off found at the very bottom of the brief we've been analyzing.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day.
And before we go, if we pull back from all these numbers and logistics, this raises an incredibly fascinating, broader question about the nature of modern travel. In an age of extreme overtourism where every destination is a globalized, hyper-connected mega resort designed to remove all friction from your life, is Norfolk Island's stubborn, isolated 1950s time warp actually a feature rather than a bug?
That's a great point. We spend our daily lives trying to engineer all the inconvenience out of our days. But could learning to accept minor frictions, like waiting out a crosswind delay or having to brake for a cow on the road, or surviving a Sunday afternoon shutdown with nothing but a paperback book, could that enforced deceleration actually be the secret to experiencing a genuinely restful vacation in the modern era?
That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.